Hello, I'm Annette Young and welcome to the France 24 interview. As the world marks another International Women's Day, it's also important for us to take a look back at the extraordinary 12 months that women's rights have experienced. We've seen the emergence of that social media campaign, #MeToo, which of course here in France was Balance ton porc, or squeal on your pig as it's translated in English. Also in the last year we've seen the arrival of a new president in this country, Emmanuel Macron, who's made gender equality a top priority. And joining me today is his Secretary for Gender Equality, Marlène Schiappa. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
The first thing I really want to ask you is the fact that something which really caught the world headlines was when a group of notable women here in France, especially the renowned actress Catherine Deneuve, signed a letter denouncing the Balance ton porc, or the Me Too campaign. When you read that, what was your reaction?
Well, you know, France is a country where people like to debate, like to discuss, like to talk about philosophy. But I think it's also true that in France, some people are afraid that we might question the model of the French lover and French love, and people are fighting against that. But you know, fighting against sexist or sexual violence doesn't mean you're fighting against seduction. Sometimes it's hard to get that idea across.
Do you think things are changing, though, in France? I mean, that there is a generational shift, that younger women don't necessarily share those views anymore?
It's true that things are changing. I went all around France talking about gender equality. More than 55,000 people participated in the meetings I held. And I know that the young people are very aware of gender inequality. Young girls and young boys as well want to change things. And I have a lot of confidence in the younger generations to see that we can really achieve gender equality.
And this is all coming as you're championing new laws that would see men facing a fine of a minimum of 90 euros if they say something inappropriate in public places about a woman's body or their appearance. How difficult has that been in terms of pushing through that legislation?
Here again, it's a cultural problem. Some things have been accepted for years, for generations. For a long time, people thought, oh, well, that's just the way it is. It doesn't matter. Boys will be boys. These things were accepted, but they are not accepted any longer. And I think it is the role of the law, because the French Republic can say what we tolerate, what we don't tolerate, and indeed, we do not tolerate to see women harassed or threatened in the street or in public transportation.
Do you feel that there is growing acceptance among the French public that such behaviour will no longer be tolerated?
Yes, I believe that now this is something that we're willing to speak up about, and that's what the squeal on your pig or the Me Too movement was all about. We're not going to keep our mouths shut any longer. And now in France, we really have opened our eyes. We have seen the reality of what has happened, and we are protesting against it.
Now, your in tray is very full because there are many issues that you clearly have to deal with, and one of them is gender pay inequality. I mean, the fact is that France, despite being a major world economy, is still lagging behind when it comes to the gender pay gap. Now, I understand that there's been laws in place since the 1980s, but it appears not much has been done. So how do you bring about change?
I think that it is necessary that there is a real political will for gender equality. It's true that there are a lot of laws, but they're not all applied. For example, with regard to politics, there is a law that says that if you don't have as many women on your candidate list as men, you can be subject to fines. But there are a lot of political parties that would rather pay the fine than have women on their ticket. The same thing is true with gender pay inequality. There are companies that would rather pay a fine than pay women the same amount as men. So I think we have to come back to the source of these inequalities, that is, part-time jobs for women or career breaks. And we have to do this by applying penalties to companies that do not respect the law in this regard.
And we would say that in English, naming and shaming companies. I mean, it's about changing cultural mindsets, isn't it?
Yes, completely. And it's something that we do. It's not something that we're used to doing in France. And so the first time that I did a naming and shaming operation, I found that the companies were quite shocked. They protested because in France, this is not something that we easily accept. There are other countries where this does happen, and it works quite well. And I think that it is a way of mobilizing public opinion. It is a way of telling companies that they have to look to public opinion, that public opinion is on our side, and that their image will be tarnished if they don't act in favor of women's equality.
Another important issue in terms of equality is a country's foreign policy, the way in which it approaches diplomatic issues. I mean, we've heard that the President is very much committed to promoting equality. Is that the case when it comes to decisions relating to foreign matters?
Yes, that's completely true. When Emmanuel Macron went to Davos for the World Economic Forum, he spoke in particular about the education of young girls, and that will be an important part of our development policy. But beyond that, it's true that we are deploying our diplomatic efforts in this direction, and it's very important for France, which is, after all, the country of Simone de Beauvoir and Simone Weil. We have a responsibility in the world. And in fact, two of the actresses that accused Harvey Weinstein in the very beginning, Asia Argento and Rose McGowan, left their countries to come to France because they believe that France is a country where gender equality is well respected. This is part of France's image around the world.
But it can be difficult. We saw that in the last few years with the Swedish foreign minister in terms of coming under fire when she took a stand against what was going on in Saudi Arabia. It's not an easy path to choose, is it?
Of course, it's not easy. It's also something that's quite sensitive, but it is part of France's responsibility. It's part of our honor to really defend gender equality. I received a delegation of Saudi women, for example, who were fighting for equality in their country, and they were seeking French support. At the time when they came to see me, they had just obtained the right to drive an automobile, and so I invited them to the Le Mans 24-hour speed race. And it's important to see that, why couldn't a woman one day win a championship race course?
So in your opinion, what are the other important issues that need to be addressed?
I think it's a cultural combat, and I think that the priority is that gender equality should be a very important, a priority subject for debate. I think this is something that is happening and that will happen under Macron's presidency. People are now starting to talk about gender equality at the coffee machine, at work, in their groups of friends. This is a sign of progress. I think that we will achieve gender equality because it is a cultural issue above all. And I think fighting against sexist and sexual violence is really the basic point, because when women are fearful for their physical safety in public space, they're not going to be able to go be Wonder Woman or a super businesswoman on the job if they're afraid for their own safety when they take the subway to work.
In your opinion, is there any other country in Europe that's got it right?
That's doing things well. Well, we work a lot with Sweden. I work with Åsa Egnow, who's the Minister for Gender Equality in Sweden. And she also told me that, Sweden is not a paradise by any means, but nonetheless it is well in advance with regard to, for example, the role of men in the family. This is very inspiring. I think we all have to work together. When I go to the EU Commission, I can talk about it. I've talked about this with the Italian and German ministers of women's rights. I think it's really a European subject. We have to face challenges on the European level, for example, the crisis of women in digital technology jobs, or the challenge of involving fathers more in family life. This is something that we can solve on a European level, I believe.
And finally, 20 years from now, in 2038, what would you, as a French woman, like to see in place in terms of equality?
I think that safety in public spaces is the priority. If we could hope that our daughters and our granddaughters would be able to walk freely in the streets without having to set up avoidance strategies when they see groups of boys, if they could go out at 3 o'clock in the morning or in a miniskirt if they want to and feel safe, that should be a priority. That would be a big step forward for women's equality.
And a woman president, maybe?
That can happen too.
Secretary Schiappa, thank you so much for being with us. And that's it for the France 24 interview. Do stay with us because there'll be more news and headlines coming up very shortly.